We are beginning. Dear friends, good afternoon. Today is the 14th of September 2021. It is 2 p.m. Moscow time. We're beginning this session of the Dissertation Council for the Defense of the thesis by Andrei Sidorenko. The thesis is submitted in conformity with requirements for the academic degree of the candidate of philological sciences. The specialization is 100103, foreign literature. The topic of the dissertation is Chinese socialist realism's value guidances and their rethinking in contemporary Chinese fiction. Under the order issued by the academic secretary of St. Petersburg State University, I, Professor Alexander Starozhuk, have been appointed the chairperson of the Dissertation Council. The other members of the Dissertation Council have been appointed by the same order. They are Professor Samoylov Nikolai, St. Petersburg State University. Professor Samoylov, can you hear us and see us? Yes, I can hear you and I can see you. Professor Alexander Lamanov, a professor of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Professor Lamanov, can you hear us and see us? Yes, I can hear you and see you. Professor Marina Kravtsova, can you hear us and see us? Yes, I can hear you and see you. Professor Rostislav Berezkin, PhD, Senior Research Fellow in Fudan University, China. Can you hear us and see us? Good afternoon. Yes, I can hear you and see you. I can see everybody and I can hear everybody. These members of the Academic Council are participating online. And here is Professor Pelevin of St. Petersburg State University. He is also a member of the Dissertation Council. The academic degree seeker, Mr. Andrei Sidorenko, is also here. Moreover, his research advisor, Professor Alexei Rodionov, Associate Professor of St. Petersburg State University, is also attending this session of the Dissertation Council. I would like to ask the members of the Dissertation Council who are attending this session via Skype to switch off their microphones. This session of the Dissertation Council is being recorded and broadcast on the official website of St. Petersburg State University. It is also being interpreted into English. You can ask questions and make comments about the dissertation using the email address that you can find on the official webpage. Therefore, you have a chance to participate in the discussion. The technical personnel will refer the questions to me and I will read them out during the discussion. The questions are supposed to be relevant to the contents of the dissertation. The authors of the questions are to write down their name, position and workplace. The questions that are not relevant to the contents of the dissertation and anonymous questions will not be read out. Under the order on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, issued by St. Petersburg State University, hereinafter referred to as the order, this session of the Dissertation Council is duly constituted, provided at least 2/3 of the members of the Dissertation Council are present. The total number is not to be fewer than 4 people. This Dissertation Council consists of 6 people, 6 of which are present, including 4 people who are attending the session remotely. Therefore, we have a quorum. I would like to ask the representative of the Department for the Dissertation Council Management to make an attendance list. The agenda of the session is as follows. Number 1, the chairman's presentation about the documents submitted by the academic degree seeker and their conformity with the requirements. The chairman's reply to the questions, if any. The academic degree seeker's presentation providing an overview and findings of the research. Questions to the degree seeker regarding the presentation, no more than 2 minutes for each question. Replies to the questions. Reports on the dissertation. The council members will be taking the floor in turns. About 10 minutes per person. The chairman's report on the dissertation. About 10 minutes. The academic degree seeker's comments about the reports on the dissertation and replies to the questions, no more than 20 minutes. Open discussion. The floor will be given to the members of the audience. They can give a brief account of their ideas or ask questions about the research. No more than 5 minutes per person. It is necessary to fill in the registration form and give their full name before the talk. The chairperson will read out the questions received via email. Please note that questions which take more than 2 minutes to read will not be read out. The degree seeker's answers to the questions, presentation of the dissertation supervisor, deliberations of the members of the Dissertation Council before the open balloting. Next, open balloting, vote counting and recording of the results in the protocol. Making a decision on whether to confer or not to confer the academic degree, the degree seeker's closing speech, no more than 2 minutes. Before proceeding with the agenda, I would like to ask if you have any questions or objections about the agenda. Since there are no objections, I would like to proceed with the agenda. Please leave your telephones set on silent mode. The council members participating in the session remotely are advised not to switch off their mobile phone so that we can contact you in case of a technical failure. Let me proceed with the agenda. The chairman's presentation. The dissertation is submitted in conformity with the requirements for the academic degree of the candidate of philological sciences, scientific specialty 100103, foreign literature, literature of Middle East and Far East. The topic of the dissertation is Chinese socialist realism's value guidances and their rethinking in contemporary Chinese fiction. The dissertation was approved for the defense by the order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg State University. Mr. Andrei Sidorenko completed the thesis in St. Petersburg State University. The research advisor is Associate Professor of St. Petersburg State University, Alexei Rodionov. The degree seeker has published 4 research papers. Three papers have been published in peer-reviewed journals recommended by the Ministry of Education and Science. The degree seeker has submitted a full set of documents to the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg State University. The documents are in compliance with item 12 of section 3 of the order. The documents are stored in the dossier. The representative of the Department for Dissertation Council Management has the copies of the documents. Before giving the floor to the academic degree seeker, I would like to ask the members of the Dissertation Council if they have any questions to the academic degree seeker, and if it is necessary to read out the list of documents. No questions? Thank you. Now I give the floor to the academic degree seeker. You have 15 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, the topic of my dissertation is Chinese socialist realism's value guidances and their rethinking in contemporary Chinese fiction. Historical and revolutionary topic as part of the current and past occupy an important place in the work of modern Chinese prose writers. These writers refer to Chinese history not only as a historical background, but also as a profound structure that defines the cultural contexts. The most famous works of these years today are referred to as Red Classics, and these works had a great influence on the formation and creative development of leading Chinese literary writers. The general context of the works created by the prose writers in 1980s and 1990s allow us to view these works as a single corpus and also to trace their common genealogy. The presence of both a formed corpus texts of Chinese social realism and an extensive corpus of representative literary works of the 1980s, 1990s make it possible, through their comparison, to trace the rethinking of value guidances of socialist realism as one of the most essential laws of the modern literary process in China. Works by leading literary scholars dedicated to the Chinese Red Classics and the perception of socialist realism in the Chinese literary process create the foundations and prerequisites for conceptualizing the value guidances. The accumulated literary critical and literary historical material does not give a coherent and consistent characteristic, coupled with the presence of the two above-mentioned corpora of texts, make the research topic relevant. The object of the research is the coverage of historical and revolutionary topics in Chinese literature. The subject matter of the research is the rethinking of the value guidances of social realism in prose as a structure-forming marker of the stadial development of the literary process. The objective of the study is to characterize the rethinking of the value attitudes of socialist realism in the contemporary Chinese literature. The specific objectives are as follows: to characterize the theoretical foundations of the structural mode of the stadial development of the access sphere of the Chinese literary process in the second half of the 20th century. 2. To formulate the essence and outline the boundaries of the applicability of the term value guidance. 3. To give the characteristics of the socialist realist characteristics of the Chinese literature. 4. To show the place of the historical and revolutionary topics. 5. To conduct an analysis of the mechanisms relevant to the topic. 6. To describe the concept of the new historical prose as one of the approaches combining the works of the late 20th century. 7. To study the coverage of historical and revolutionary topics. We have selected 7 novels which are significant for the history of Chinese literature of the second half of the 20th century. They are Jinlin, The Sun Shines Over the Sanggan River, Du Penchen, Defense of Yuan, Liang Bin, Keep the Red Flag Flying, Chan Wei, The Ancient Ship, Liu Chunshen, Yellow Flowers Under the Sky of the Motherland, and some others. Our choice of works for detailed analysis is based, on the one hand, on the representativeness of the literary process of China in the second half of the 20th century, as well as on the fact that they describe similar historical periods, which make it possible to make a direct comparison of the exosphere of the two stages, and it is more effective to trace the difference in the value structures, which in our opinion personify the stage-by-stage movement of the literary process in the period under consideration. The scientific novelty of the research is in the actualization of the concept value attitude. Moreover, we have introduced into scientific discourse a number of novels. The main research findings are as follows. Literature of the period of the 17 years, 1949-1966, is part of socialist realism and constitutes a single macro text. Number 2, the Chinese version of socialist realism as applied to literature is a corpus of pragmatically oriented texts. Number 3, revolutionary history is a structurally significant part of the thematic basis of Chinese socialist realism, which makes it not only an object of artistic representation within the framework of socialist realism literature, but also a platform for rethinking its value guidances. 4, the rethinking of the value guidances in contemporary Chinese literature reflects structural changes in the exosphere of culture. 5, rethinking the value guidances of socialist realism in modern Chinese literature as a process is a complex of interdependent narrative and descriptive techniques aimed at creating a more realistic, as opposed to idealized image of revolutionary history and particular and the relevant past in general. We can present the value systems as a group of revolutionary think-tanks, and over the mentioned period, the exosphere of the Chinese literature was oversimplified. And in my dissertation, I elaborate on this issue, speaking about the stages of the literary process. One should remember the concept developed by Professor Papirny, according to which culture alternately stays in the state of culture 1, then in the state of culture 2. At the same time, real culture never fully dwells in a state that has only characteristics of culture 2 or culture 1. The binary opposition culture 1, culture 2 is only a concept. Like any other concept, cannot include and describe absolutely everything that happened during the period under consideration. That is, the stages of literary development do not just follow one another, but, as it were, overlap each other. In other words, the realistic description was sort of sandwiched between the good and the bad. The main tectonic shift, which serves as a platform for the stadial development of the literary process in China, took place as a realistic content which was placed in Chinese socialist realism in a small gap between the bad and the good. And in 1980s and 1990s, it expanded the scope of its living space, and now the good and the bad became its periphery rather than narrow frames. It should be emphasized that the results of rethinking value guidances of social realism were not only a rejection of the old strategy of creative comprehension, but also the approval of a new one, which can be briefly described as a return to the orientation towards reality. So rethinking of the system of values mean that the subject matter of the novels is broader. Here I mean such novels as To Live, Brothers, The Song of Eternal Sorrow, The Life and Death Are Wearing Me Out, One Word with 1,000, and many other writers. In other words, the rethinking of the value guidances of socialist realism forms the basis for the development of the literary process after the end of the Cultural Revolution, either as their explicit destruction or as a result of their replacement by the post-socialist value structure. Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we proceed with the agenda, and before I ask the members of the Dissertation Council to ask their questions, I would like to make a technical break. This is technical break number 1, because we are having some technical failures.
Вот. Итак, сейчас все уладил.
We have resolved the technical issue, so we don't need a technical break. Let us continue with the agenda. I would like to ask the members of the Dissertation Council if they have any questions about the presentation. Or do you have any questions about the contents of the dissertation? So, dear colleagues, should you have any questions, you're welcome to ask them. There are no questions. Now, I would like to proceed with the agenda. Professor Ekaterina Zavidovskaya has sent an external report. She works in Bryansk State University. I have this report in front of me. The report analyzes the structure and the contents of the dissertation. She emphasizes that the dissertation has a theoretical value. The degree seeker focuses on the value of systems in different works. He also focuses on the semiosis of values, the semiosis of anti-values, the pragmatics of the narrative, and axiology of the space. He also describes the works of the Red Classics. He also writes about the new historical prose and about the pragmatics of the narrative, and this is the novelty of the research. I would like to say that the approach here is an axiological one, which ensures the structural integrity of the dissertation. The overall assessment is positive, and she thinks that Mr. Andrei Sidorenko should be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philological sciences. Now we will proceed with the reports of the members of the Dissertation Council. Since all the reports are posted on the official website, I suggest that you focus on the most relevant parts of your reports or read out the comments and questions. Do you have any objections? Since there are no objections, I would like to give the floor to Professor Bilevin. Can you hear me? Dear colleagues, I will read out only some parts of my report. The dissertation deals with the evolution of the social realism prose in Chinese literature. The degree seeker made a successful comparative analysis of the literary works that refer to two periods: before the Cultural Revolution and after the Cultural Revolution. The scientific contribution of the academic degree seeker and the novelty of the dissertation are connected with the fact that the degree seeker uses new methods and new theoretical approaches. The theoretical framework here is the axiological approach, but he also uses other scientific methods, such as methods of pragmatics, methods of semiotics, and so on. I would like to say that this is a copious research. The degree seeker analyzes 7 novels. These novels give us a good idea of what Chinese prose was. 2 novels have not been translated into Russian and have not been studied before. The academic degree seeker draws upon different research papers, and this is extremely important because the literary material is highly politicized. What I find interesting here is that Mr. Sidorenko shows the dynamics of the inner discourse, namely the discussions and debates among the Chinese scholars. There's one article dating 1957, which describes the literature of proletarian revolution, and there's also another article which dates back to 2010. The dissertation is well structured. The third and the fourth parts of the dissertation also discuss the influence of Soviet literature on Chinese literature. There's also a parallel with the Russian-Soviet ideology. The academic degree seeker defines this concept as a grand narrative. To characterize literary works, Mr. Sidorenko uses the concept of the semiosis of values and anti-values, which shows the dynamics of positive and negative characters. He also focuses on the pragmatics of the narrative in his dissertation. He also uses such term as the restriction of politicization. However, I didn't quite understand this term. The research findings of the degree seeker are credible. They are social historical prose of the period under consideration, can be regarded as a single macro text, which involves the binary opposition value-anti-value. And the idea was to legitimize the power of the Chinese Communist Party. When discussing the issue of rethinking the system of value, Mr. Sidorenko uses the term the new historical prose. However, the degree seeker doubts the term historical here. He formulates 5 most important characteristics of the quasi-new historical prose. And these new characteristics should be elaborated upon, I believe. I believe the degree seeker should have elaborated on these issues. For example, on the statement that the formation of the new type of literature was a response to social and political processes, and on the other hand, it also reflects the influence of the market processes. Mr. Sidorenko doesn't discuss the influence of classical Chinese literature on modern Chinese literature and new prose. However, this issue is very important for scientific discourse and for the historical perspective. In the dissertation, the degree seeker tries to trace traditional motives in the novels that he's considering. For example, he tries to trace the traditional motives in the images of the landowners. Mr. Sidorenko also mentions the influence of some Chinese classical novels on new Chinese prose. He also mentions the symbolism of personal names, and this idea also has some traditional aspect. There are some also objectionable statements, for example, about a 0 degree of emotions in one of the novels that he's discussing. I don't think that the 0 degree of emotions is possible. Or the degree seeker also talks about the hallucination aspect in one of the novels. Probably you should have talked about the surrealism. You also make an overall conclusion that in the novels we see the model of the real world. I believe that this is not about the real world, but this is about something else. It's a travesty world, if we follow the terminology by Michael Bakhtin. In the second chapter, you talk too much about the philosophical aspect. I'm coming to the end of my report, but in general, the dissertation by Andrei Sidorenko is a complete research paper which focuses on rethinking of value guidances in Chinese social realism. The dissertation involves descriptive analysis and literary criticism. The dissertation by Andrei Sidorenko complies with the major requirements set forth in order number 681/1 on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, and Andrei Sidorenko can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philological sciences. The specialty is 100103, foreign literature, literature of Middle and Far East. Thank you. Thank you very much. I will give the floor to the degree seeker after all the reports have been read out. Now I would like to give the floor to Professor Samoilov. Professor Samoilov, the floor is yours. Dear colleagues, can you hear me? I am not going to read out the report from beginning to end since it is posted on the website. I will read out only the most relevant paragraphs. The dissertation by Andrei Sidorenko deals with the development of the literary process in China in the second half of the 20th century. The dissertation focuses on the axiological aspect of the literary works. Russian fiction and Soviet-Chinese literary relations had an impact on modern Chinese literature. And the literature of social realism played an important role in it. Such authors as Lucin, Mao Dun, and many others familiarized the Chinese reader with the Soviet literature. The topic of the dissertation is relevant. There are many research papers about Chinese literature. However, the new historical prose has not been studied elaborately. Researchers mostly focus on specific literary works rather than on the new historical prose in general. Moreover, many authors emphasize that the literary process developed in stages. And in fact, the stages in the literary process are defined by the historical development of China. And Mr. Sidorenko uses an axiological and a literary approach in order to give the description of the stages of the literary process. I would like also to emphasize that the researcher describes and gives an in-depth analysis of 7 literary works. Mr. Andrei Sidorenko studied official documents, literary studies, mass media articles, literary critical papers, monographs, and different other research papers. He has analyzed a large number of works written by Russian and foreign scholars. The theoretical part of the dissertation is quite copious. The degree seeker draws upon the works of such scholars as Lotman, Vakhtin, and Sidorenko. He also uses the concept of culture too, which was characterized by Professor Paperne. The third chapter of the dissertation describes the literature of the 17 years. And the fourth chapter describes the rethinking of the system of values in social realism. I believe that the dissertation is logical and well structured. The dissertation is written in a good scientific language, however, there are some inaccuracies and misprints. The research findings are credible because the degree seeker has consistently analyzed the material. The degree seeker has published 4 papers. 3 of these papers have been published in the journals recommended by the Ministry of Education and Science. However, I would like to say that I have some critical comments about the dissertation. The theoretical part of the dissertation is not detailed enough. I believe you should have elaborated on some issues here. This structure of the analysis of the works of social realism and of the works of the new historical prose are not consistent. The degree seeker explains why he uses different methods. However, I believe that the literary works published in 1980s, 1990s could have been described through the dichotomy. On page 64, you mention the so-called CC, and you call this organization the Club of Centrists. There are two versions here. The one version is that the group was called after the leaders of this group. And the second idea is that it is connected with the central club where the members of this group gathered. However, your translation gives an idea that it is somehow connected with the centrists. Number 4, I believe you should have elaborated on one of the novels by Zhao Shuli. And number 5, there are some stylistic inaccuracies and misprints in the dissertation. I'm not going to read out the example from my report. However, I would like to say that these remarks do not change the overall positive assessment of the dissertation. And Mr. Andrei Sidorenko has written a serious research work, and he can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of academic sciences, scientific specialty 100103, foreign literature, literature of Middle and Far East. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Samoilov. I give the floor to Professor Lamanov. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Can you hear me? I would like to emphasize that the degree seeker has analyzed the evolution of the value system. The degree seeker has developed his own approach and his own interpretation. I would like to say that he has described the impact of social Russian literature, of Soviet literature on social realism in China. He shows that the Chinese authors were ready to welcome Soviet social realism. And he gives a detailed description of how Soviet social realism influenced Chinese literature. The author demonstrates a radical contrast between literary approaches in 1950s, 1960s and the literature which was written during the period of the reforms. The degree seeker should be merited for the fact that he has written his dissertation in a very interesting way. He compared two periods, and in order to make a comparison, he uses similar plots. And he compared the system of values when it comes to the main plots in literature, and the contrast was really dramatic. First of all, we see compliance with the official history, we see compliance with the ideology, and we see that there's a dichotomy between the others and us. So the reader comes to the conclusion that those who support the Chinese Communist Party have the best values. However, in the new Chinese prose, these plots are described in a different way. Communists here have dubious values, and simple common people have their doubts, and sometimes they do not support the Communist Party. It's the triumph of the relativist approach, which shows that the winner is not better than the one that has not won. And I believe that this is one of the strong points of the dissertation, namely the description of this relativist approach. The merit of the dissertation is that it goes beyond the scope of literary criticism. It expands our knowledge of modern Chinese culture and modern Chinese ideology. The degree seeker draws upon the textbook on the history of Chinese literature, and this was really important for the dissertation. The degree seeker focuses on the literary works written in the 20th century, and the degree seeker gives a comprehensive analysis of the literary works written in the 20th century. And after reading the dissertation, I feel I want to know what happened next. If you read modern Chinese scholars, you will see that new Chinese prose is marginalized. It was marginalized in 1990s. I have already mentioned that the dissertation is really valuable, and right now China is making their best in order to promote their values, and I believe that this promotional campaign also had an impact on modern Chinese literature. In other words, the market economy gave birth to the new Chinese prose. However, we do not see the crisis in the Chinese socialist system as well. When China was preparing the celebrations of the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party, they emphasized the values, the old values. Is there coming back to the old values in China? I believe this is not within the scope of the dissertation, but this is a really good dissertation, and I believe the degree seeker will publish the dissertation as a monograph. And I would like to read the expanded version of the dissertation. So if you want to publish this dissertation as a monograph, you should characterize the literary works which were written in the 21st century, especially those that were written when the current Chinese leader came to power. I believe that the dissertation by Andrei Sidorenko complies with the major requirements set forth in the relevant order of St. Petersburg State University, and Mr. Andrei Sidorenko can really be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philological sciences, the specialty 100103, foreign literature. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor to Professor Kravtsova. Can you hear me? I would like to be brief. The dissertation is a serious, complete research work which provides a copious and an in-depth analysis. It's not a secret that dissertations today are regarded as qualification works, but this dissertation is much better than just a qualification work. He focuses on the two periods of Chinese literature. He draws upon different scholarly papers. And the degree seeker also gives an in-depth analysis and critical analysis, and he uses new methods and new approaches in his dissertation. I believe that the novelty of the dissertation is that the author developed new approaches and new methods. The dissertation makes a theoretical contribution, and I agree with my colleagues that it contributes to the overall understanding of modern Chinese culture. Mr. Sidorenko has developed a comprehensive concept. The objectives are in line with the topic of the dissertation. The dissertation is well structured and logical. The research findings and conclusions are in line with the topic of the dissertation and are in line with the objectives of the dissertation. Some sections of the dissertation are scientifically valuable on their own. I would like to say that the degree seeker's interpretation allows us to see some works in a new perspective. I would like to emphasize that the degree seeker is familiar with the Chinese literature and with the history of Chinese literature. He gives a brief description of many literary works which are relevant for the dissertation. This allows the degree seeker to provide an in-depth analysis and description of the literary works. One section deals with the new Chinese prose. or rather new historical prose. Here he discusses the overall terminology and he introduces his own term and his own interpretation. Many statements are valuable on their own and they can be further elaborated. In order to identify the system of values, Mr. Sidorenko draws upon literary works related to Russian literature and medieval literature. I don't think that these works are relevant to Chinese literature. The red prose follows the Chinese tradition and the Soviet prose, which is a very important conclusion in the dissertation. And he also emphasizes the ideological aspect of Chinese literature. I have some questions. It is not a critical remark, but it's just a question. You can agree or disagree with my ideas. Chinese social realism, can it be the emanation of Confucianism, didactical, pragmatical approach to when? Is it so or is it not so? This is the idea that came to me when I was reading the dissertation. What I also find important is that the system of values of the red classics is in line with the social utopic ideas. Unfortunately, this idea is not elaborated upon in the dissertation. Here I mean such ideas as belief in the better future, fight with the existing regime, and different other values. So these ideas reflect communist ideology. Therefore, it seems that the red classics refers to the national historical memory rather than to communist and social realist ideas. So this is a question, and it's up to the degree seeker to agree or to disagree with this statement. I would like also to make some other comments here. You can agree or disagree with these statements. The association of 8 landowners with 8 immortals doesn't look convincing. I think they personify the concept of 8 winds. The name Van Lao Hu doesn't mean tiger, it means old tiger. So probably this name has another semantic load. Characteristics Pandehua in the same novel. Life in the cave brings in mind the image of the thinker and military leader Zhuge Moreover, Liabin, when he talks about the living of the landowner, doesn't imply any associations with the West. The name Sun Shigein probably also has some extra semantic associations. I do not have any general critical remarks here, and I believe the degree seeker can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philological sciences. Thank you very much. I give the floor to Professor Berezkin. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I would like to read out some abstracts of my report. First of all, I would like to say that the topic of the dissertation is relevant. My colleagues have already mentioned this. Today, the literary works of the new historical prose are being translated and are being studied in Russia and in Europe. Some of the Chinese authors are known around the world. However, there's very limited amount of research papers on the new historical prose. And this dissertation regards these texts as a macro text. My colleagues have already mentioned that new texts have been introduced into scientific discourse. The degree seeker provides quotations from these works. He focuses mostly on 7 novels. However, he makes references to other literary works which are relevant to the dissertation. I have some remarks and comments about the dissertation. I believe that the dissertation provides an in-depth analysis and a very comprehensive analysis. However, this approach makes it difficult to provide an in-depth analysis of specific literary works. Probably you should have focused on a more narrow historical period. The period of the new historical prose is the most relevant one, I believe. The description of the values of social realism are also important in order to assess the literature of a later period. However, I believe you could have described these values more briefly. I would like to say that sometimes the dissertation looks unbalanced. You mentioned some important novels. However, you do not provide an in-depth analysis and description. of these novels. Therefore, the structure of the dissertation looks unbalanced. I also have some doubts about some theoretical statements. My colleague has already said that the use of the work by prop, the morphology of the fairy tale, is not validated. I believe that some theoretical provisions from this work are not relevant to the dissertation. Prop's theory was developed for folklore works, and probably these principles are not applicable to modern prose. You probably should have used the provisions of structuralism and post-structuralism. However, these are specific questions which do not change the overall positive assessment of the dissertation. The dissertation of Mr. Andrei Sidorenko complies with the major requirements set forth in the relevant order of St. Petersburg State University. And the academic degree seeker can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philological sciences. The specialty is 100103, foreign literature. Okay, that would be all. Thank you very much. I will read out some abstracts from my report. I will not read it out from beginning to end because it has been posted on the website. One of the challenges of the topic is its interdisciplinary character, and the researcher here must be a literary critic, a literary scholar, and he must also have in-depth knowledge of history, ethnography, politology, and so on. And I believe that Mr. Andrei Sidorenko demonstrates his good command in different spheres. The dissertation provides a highly scientific analysis of Chinese literary works. The study of modern literature often implies that the researcher is the one to study some issues. The same can be said about this dissertation. I believe that his interpretation of the value of such concepts as value, aim, value guidance are important. He draws upon such works as those written by Lotman, Bakhtin, Morris, and many others. The method that he uses combines the ideas of the Finnish linguist Anguist about literary pragmatics and the concept developed by Roman Barthes, ideas by Galperin about the information in the text, and binary oppositions, and interpretation of culture too, proposed by Professor Papierny. And And I believe that the degree seeker is able to combine knowledge from different spheres in his dissertation. The theoretical part of the dissertation is extremely important, I believe, and its theoretical foundations are really important and have theoretical and practical value. The degree seeker should be merited for describing different stages of new Chinese literature. He draws upon historical documents, literary works, and different other scholarly works relevant for the dissertation. As a result, the research findings are credible. In the dissertation, there are some inaccuracies and stylistic drawbacks. I quote, I include some quotations in my report. I would like also to say that you should have accompanied the names of Chinese authors with their dates of life. These comments are not serious, and I believe that the dissertation by Andrei Sidorenko is a complete research work. It has a scientific novelty, and it discusses an issue which has a theoretical and practical importance. This work will be interesting for historians, philosophers, and many scholars that study literature and public thought of the 20th century. In general, I would like to say that the dissertation by Andrei Sidorenko, Chinese Socialist Realism's Value Guidances and Their Rethinking in Contemporary Chinese Fiction, complies with the major requirements set forth in the relevant order issued by St. Petersburg State University. Mr. Andrei Sidorenko can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philological sciences. The scientific specialty is 100103, foreign literature. All the reports have been read out. I would like to give the floor to the degree seeker. Please answer the questions. I would like to answer the questions. The first report was by Professor Katerina Zavidovskaya. I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Zavidovskaya. She mentions that I should have also focused on the literary works of the 21st century, and I agree with her that this is an important research material. I would like to thank Professor Pilevin. The role of social and cultural factors in the literary process and the rethinking of values is really important. However, I did not elaborate on this issue in my dissertation, and I did it on purpose. The dissertation is written in order to get an academic degree in the scientific specialization foreign literature. So social and cultural factors are important, however they are not relevant for the scientific specialty. Because I believe that these aspects are not within the scope of the dissertation. I also would like to say that in my dissertation I wrote about the influence of traditional Chinese literature on the red classics. However, traditional Chinese literature includes a great number of texts. Therefore, I took into account this aspect. Of course, red classics draws upon traditional Chinese literature, not only Marxist ideas, which is not a Chinese ideology. I took these ideas into account, but I also understand that this issue merits a separate research work. So I didn't want to focus on it just briefly. Now a few words about the term politicization. It means that grand narrative is not convincing. For example, in the novel by Dean Lee, a peasant became rich, but he didn't exploit anyone. And this is the restriction in the novel. There are some elements in the novel, and the character here is sandwiched between the good and the bad. And now a few words about the 0 degree of emotion. This term is used by Chinese scholars in their works. That is why I used this term in my dissertation. This term is commonly used by Chinese literary scholars. These terms means the absence of pathos in the fiction. I might have used a narrow term which is not clear to everybody. And this term is more familiar to those who are dealing with Chinese literature. A few words about the philosophical ideas about the concept of the goal. I wrote a separate section here. I believe that the goal is higher than the value. We shouldn't mix these two concepts. The goal is in line with the values, but value is not a goal. I would like to thank Professor Samoilov. Thank you for your comment about the Central Club. I didn't know, and I would like to say sorry for the inaccurate translation. I sometimes wrote some ideas very briefly in order to make the dissertation easier to read. Now a few words about the new historical prose. I made an attempt to regard the novel by Liu Jinyun through the perspective of the dichotomy which I used for social realism. However, this attempt wasn't successful because this approach didn't allow us to encompass all the relevant ideas. Moreover, if we talk about the semiosis of values and anti-values, it is possible to identify them within the framework of a specific literary work. However, the values are closely connected with the overall plot of the literary work. So I believe that the concept of dichotomy didn't always work for my literal analysis. I also mentioned the novel changes in Sidorenko. It's a very important literary work. However, I didn't focus on the studies of this particular novel. I believe that we can find similar ideas in some other novels which I describe in my dissertation. But you're right, I could have made use of this novel as well. For example, in one of the novels, the author describes how the character's life changes when the Communist Party comes to power. And in my future research, I will make an attempt to analyze this novel as well. There are some misprints in my dissertation, and I would like to say that I'm sorry. I would like to thank Professor Lamanov for his report. You asked about the marginalization of the new historical prose. The marginalization of new historical prose means that the term is not that popular anymore. However, the prose of the 21st century still deals with similar issues. The Communist Party is taking a lot of efforts in order to form a specific public opinion. As Lu Jinyun put it, the writers still have some liberties when they are writing their works. The surveilling authorities focus more on mass culture rather than on literature. The Red Classics is still relevant for cinema. There are screen adaptations of the Red Classics. And one of the novels, Through the Mountains and Snow, has recently been adapted for screen. It was adapted for screen about 2 years ago. And this film is very similar to a Hollywood blockbuster. However, this is a red film, if I may put it so. This is about the trends, the current trends. You also asked a question about one episode in the textbook. When I reading this novel, I translated one of the terms as scissors. But when I wrote about this novel, I translated the hieroglyph as a knife. I'm sorry for the mistake. I also use another term, double hundred. The first hieroglyph uses the attributive model. So I believe the first hieroglyph can be translated into Russian as an adjective. So I believe you can say double hundred or 200. Both these translations will reflect the meaning of the hieroglyphs. I would like to thank Professor Kravtsova for her report. I would like to explain why I find scholarly works by Russian and European scholars relevant for the dissertation. Chinese literature and New Chinese literature is influenced by Western literature. I don't want to say that I give a comprehensive description in my dissertation. I rather focus on one aspect of mutual influence between Chinese and European literature. However, I believe that Bakhtin, Lotman, Prof, and many other scholars wrote theoretical papers which are also relevant for analyzing Chinese literature. For example, Michael Bakhtin mentions that the development of a novel is a travesty so it is possible to find typological parallels between new historical prose and the satirical novel. It means that we can use Michael Bakhtin's terms when it comes to analyzing Chinese literature. So the general theoretical framework, I believe, is relevant for analyzing Chinese literature. Now a few words about traditional influences in social realism. The influence of traditional factors on Chinese red classics is quite strong. Sometimes it is defining Chinese red classics started as a classical novel which consists of many chapters. The novel, the classical red novels consist of many chapters, and I believe that to analyze the influence of traditional factors is not within the scope of the topic of this dissertation. Traditional culture could be regarded as one aspect when it comes to rethinking social realism's values. But then it means that traditional realism is more than traditional culture, which is not true. I believe that social realism is equal to traditional literature. Different types of Chinese literature are all important for Chinese culture. Anyway, I would like to thank you for your comments. Your comments allowed me to expand my approach. Thank you very much for your comments. I would like to thank Professor Berezkin. I don't think I should have written about Chinese social realism briefly, because a comprehensive analysis of this issue allows me to provide a comprehensive analysis. New historical prose does not allow us to focus on rethinking of Chinese guidances. Now about the novel by Chen Jushi. This novel is a multifaceted one, and it has not been introduced into Russian scientific discourse. I wanted to fill in this gap That is why I give an in-depth description of this novel in my dissertation. As far as I remember, I wanted to continue the research of this novel. However, I limited myself with aspects relevant for rethinking value guidances. The novel also deals with magical realism, with classic Chinese literature, and different other aspects. In my dissertation, I also mentioned that this novel is about the tragedy of the breakup of the traditional lifestyle when it clashes with something new. Now a few words about the dynamics of social realism in the world literary process. This comment is very important, and I will focus on it in my future research. I also draw upon the work by Prop. Chinese social realism was written by specific authors, however it was monitored by the partnering power. And some authors even described the fact that they went to Beijing in order to have his manuscript reviewed. The Chinese Minister of Culture made comments about his novel and advised him how to improve the novel. For example, the Chinese Minister of Culture said that the death of communists should be excluded from the novel. When it comes to works by Prop, I believe that in social realism, each character is a sign. So each character has some actions. If it's a landowner, then he is an exploitator and he damages the lives of other people. In Prop's theory, for example, the devil has to make damage, and in social realism, the landowner is a bad guy, and the peasant, for example, doesn't own a land, doesn't earn money, and is not friendly with the landowner. Because social realism limits the range of actions performed by different characters. Therefore, I believe that the theoretical framework developed by Prop is relevant for analyzing Chinese literature of social realism. And I believe that at first glance it may seem that fairy tales have nothing in common with Chinese social realism, but Prop's ideas are very important for structural analysis of literary works. Now I would like to thank Professor Starozhuk I provided a brief biological reference to important writers. However, I do not disagree with your statement. I wouldn't say that the authors some authors are not important, and I will make some corrections in my future research work. I believe that biographical references are important and give a bigger picture to the reader. I would like to say that I'm sorry for the stylistic remarks, and I will make any effort to get rid of all the stylistic inaccuracies in my future research work. Thank you very much for your reports. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, dear members of the Dissertation Council, is everyone satisfied with the answers? I would like to clarify something. I am satisfied with the answers. However, I would like to clarify some point. I didn't want to criticize you for your theoretical part. Your theoretical part is superb. I was rather interested in why you find some provisions relevant, and you were able to prove the relevance of some provisions. However, my ideas are just my ideas. This is not to criticize you. I believe that this is a wonderful research work. Thank you. Have any questions been received via email? There are no questions. Does anybody want to ask a question or to make comments about the presentation or the dissertation? I would like to give the floor to the research advisor, to the research supervisor. I give the floor to Professor Rodionov. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I am happy to see you here. Thank you for reading the dissertation. As his research advisor, I have written an official report but I would like to say something informally. I believe that Mr. Andrei Sidorenko did a great job. At first, he chose another topic for research, and we had to change the topic of the dissertation because a dissertation on this similar topic was defended in Moscow. We have known Andrei Sidorenko for many years. He is very good at making generalizations and at coming with new concepts. We were able to use his strong points. He has made a number of presentations at different conferences. As his research advisor, I would like to say that he's a very disciplined researcher, and I believe that he should be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philological sciences. Thank you very much. So we don't have any new questions, and I believe nobody wants to make comments. Now our discussion is over. I would like to ask the members of the Dissertation Council and the academic degree seeker if they have any questions about the procedure of the session, including the remote participation. There are no questions. Now let us move on with the agenda. Now it is 3:47 p.m. Dear colleagues, before the open voting, we have a chance to have a technical break in order to discuss the results of the dissertation. The deliberations will not be broadcast. Do we need such a technical break in order to discuss the results? No, we don't. We don't. What about my other colleagues? We don't need a technical break. I don't think that we need a technical break. Now, let us continue with the agenda. I will ask each member of the Dissertation Council to voice their opinion. Please give me the attendance list. We're beginning the open voting on the issue of conferring the academic degree of the candidate of philological sciences, scientific specialty 100103, foreign literature, literature of Middle East and Far East. Let me remind you that the decision of the Dissertation Council on conferring the academic degree is positive, provided more than 50% of the council members have voted in favor. Professor Pelevin, what's your opinion? How do you vote? I think the degree seeker should be awarded the academic degree. Professor Samoilov, what's your opinion? I also believe that he should be awarded the academic degree. Professor Lamanov, what do you think? He should be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philological sciences. Professor Kravtsova, what do you think? He should be awarded the academic degree. Professor Berezkin, he should be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philological sciences. Thank you very much. And I'm the chairperson of the Dissertation Council. I also think that he should be awarded the academic degree. It's not tricky to count the votes. Out of the 6 members of the Dissertation Council, 6 have voted for conferring the academic degree. Nobody voted against or abstained from voting. So, Mr. Andrei Sidorenko is awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philological sciences, scientific specialty 100103, foreign literature, literature of Middle and Far East. I give the floor to Mr. Andrei Sidorenko. No more than 2 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the members of the Dissertation Council for reading my dissertation. thank you for giving your valuable comments, which are very important for me. I would like to thank Professor Zavidovskaya, who sent an external report. I would like to thank her for her positive report, and I would like to thank her for her research work. I made extensive use of her research papers. I would like to thank Professor Suvorov for his assistance. I would like to say that I find his contribution really important. I would like to thank my Chinese colleagues. I would like to thank them for finding the material. They helped me to get access to Chinese resources, namely the paper by one of the leading Chinese scholars, such as Fan Bingbing. This was very important for my research work. I would like to thank Dmitry Mayatsky for his consultations, and I would like to thank Maria Ponomaryova for coming here, and I would like to thank her for teaching me Chinese. I would like to thank Evgenia Mitkina for her critical remarks and for reading my dissertation. I would like to thank Helena Kolpachkova for her assistance. She provided me with valuable advice and with a valuable book on pragmatics, which I use in my dissertation. I would like to thank Alexander Bolshev. It occurred to me that the Department of the History of Russian Literature can be useful when it comes to the history of social realism. I had a brief consultation with Professor Bolshev, and this consultation really contributed to my research. He helped me to find important concepts, for example, the concept of culture too. This research paper was crucial for writing the theoretical framework of my dissertation. Last but not least, I would like to thank Professor Alexander Starozhuk, who is not only the chairperson of the dissertation council, but he is also my mentor. He was the first person who showed me how to talk in Chinese. I met him before I was a student, and it was at that point that I realized where my place is. It's very difficult to be brief right now, because I can't thank you enough. Again, last but not least, I would like to thank my research advisor, Professor Alexei Rodionov. He has been with me for many years. He was my supervisor when I was writing a term paper. He did everything a research advisor can do, and even more. I really enjoyed working with you. I really enjoyed working under your supervision. Your support was really valuable for me. When I was at a deadlock, I could always make a call to my research advisor and talk to him. He was able to help me. He was always able to help me move forward with my research work. When you talk to him, everything looks good. Nothing would have been possible without you. Thank you. Thank you. We would like to congratulate you. We would like to congratulate your research supervisor. This is the end of the session. I would like to thank the members of the dissertation board. Please switch off the broadcast.